Hi everybody, I'm just going to go through today what the expectations and directions are for today's assignment. So today is Wednesday, and under Wednesday directions it says read the poem and complete the guided notes in red. The first stanza has been done for you as an example. You may use some of these writer's techniques more than once. So you have a word bank at the top that has 4 writer's techniques listed in it, and you may find others that we didn't think of, and that's totally fine if you think of another one, but you should definitely be on the lookout for these 4 and some of them more than one time. Over here on the left, we have our poem of the day today. Today's poem is called Fat Man by Neil Janey. And then over here on the right side is where you're going to be taking some of these notes. So I'm going to start by just reading the poem through one time, and then we'll talk a little bit about the notes. So the poem says, I catch sight of the man en route to the mountain's summit. He carries with him a recycled Coke bottle secured to a small pack. But the man also hefts his weight inside a sweat-stained XXXL red t-shirt. He's what I call a fat man. A fat man who doesn't exercise, a fat man who engulfs food, a fat man who lives only to become fatter and fatter. He turns at my approach, then drops his eyes as they meet the expression in mine. I pass the fat man swiftly with disgust, wondering what could drive him to attempt the summit. When I glance back with this question in mind, my eyes drop to the legend on the red t-shirt. I'm hiking for the National Cancer Foundation. I caught sight of the fat man en route to the mountain summit. He carried with him a recycled Coke bottle secured to a small pack. He was heading upward. He was on a mission. So let's look back now at what the notes are. So I did the notes for the first stanza for you, just so you can get an idea of kind of what we're looking for. So the first thing we want to think about when we start reading a poem is what's happening, what's the situation, what's going on here. So when we read the first stanza, I catch sight of the man en route to the mountain summit. He carries with him a recycled Coke bottle secured to a small pack. Well, that tells me that what's going on or what's happening here is that the narrator is hiking on a mountain and then sees another hiker coming towards him. So that's what I typed over here in red. The next thing we want to consider is what writer's techniques might we be looking at here. And in this case, the writer's technique that I noticed was the effective repetition, because this exact same stanza, the whole thing, all 4 of those lines, is repeated down here at the end of the poem. So that whole stanza is an example of effective repetition. So that's what I noted for writer's technique. So what you're going to do now is take a look at some of the lines that I color-coded for you in red, and ask yourself the questions that are over here on the right. So for this stanza, you're going to ask yourself what's happening. Okay, so what is the narrator noticing about the man? And then looking at the part that's in red, what writer's technique do you think that is an example of? And again, you have your word bank at the top to choose from. And you might come up with some others that we didn't come up with, and you can note those too, and that would be great. For the next stanza down, you're looking at all 3 of those lines and asking yourself what writer's technique that is. You're going to continue down, and for this stanza here, you're going to ask yourself again what's happening here in the poem. And this one you have to kind of make an inference. So just wanted you to keep that in mind, that in order to explain what's happening here, you really do have to kind of make an inference. And then for this line that's in red, what writer's technique do you think that is? And then finally, this very last stanza, what writer's technique is that? And then there's 2 other questions at the end. One is, how did the author's opinion change? So in the beginning, the author is pretty disgusted by the man, but how did that opinion change, and why maybe did that opinion change? And then the last question down here in red says, what lesson do you think the author wants the reader to learn? The author bothered to write this whole poem and set the scene with the example of the 2 hikers. What is he hoping that we are going to learn as a reader? And this message that the author wants us to get or learn from the poem is what we call the theme. So in one single sentence, it doesn't even have to be a complete sentence, what lesson do you think we're supposed to learn from this? And once you do those things, once you fill in the red items in the right-hand column and this question here, then you're done for today.